Um, Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining the lightning rounds this morning. My name is Cindy Bowen. I'm the systems librarian at Georgetown University, and my brief overview presentation is about constructing our new report a problem buttons in Primo V. I'm presenting about this in part because I asked some of y'all on Basecamp last year what you're doing for having a report a problem function. And so I wanted to provide some follow-up because we ended up doing something completely different from what any of the other WRLC institutions are doing. So the first question, of course, is why not use the out-of-the-box feedback tool? Ex Libris finally debuted one. They added some useful features that we really wanted. So we did turn it on and had it on for a while. But it turned out that the icon appearance and location was not great for us. So our chat function has been in the bottom right corner of the Primo screen for literal years. And so when the Ex Libris tool also ended up in the bottom right corner, you can see from the screenshot that it's not a really good match. The two things look like they're connected. It's not at all clear that they're supposed to be for different functions. It looks like the chat icon or the chat function is trying to tell you something. So we suspect that the low usage we were seeing is a result of folks not actually realizing that this is a reporting function and not connected to our chat box. We did ask Ex Libris about how to customize the icon and potentially move it. So they gave us directions for changing the icon itself, which I have later in the slide, or later in my slides for folks who are curious, but the location proved intractable. And so for all of these reasons, we decided to pursue other options. So what we wanted was an intuitive button or link in visible locations. So we wanted it both on the record display and on the search result pages, because we knew that there would be potential issues or difficulties that folks would encounter in both of those places. And we also wanted it to capture the URL of the page where the button or link was clicked, because that provides us with useful context when folks who submit reports are not always very verbose in describing the problem they're encountering. So having that background can really be helpful. So the options we took a look at, basically there's a bunch of different options out there that worked for different institutions. The short answer of this was most of them, like, they wouldn't work for how we wanted it, or the appearance wasn't quite what we wanted. So for example, having a function in the send to actions bar or just below it, which American has it right below, that didn't work for us because our send to actions bar is near the bottom of our record display. So trying to add it there just wouldn't be seen. Some of the other options, the general electronic service, the JavaScript link that GW uses, just didn't quite have the appearance or location that we wanted. In terms of the search results page, I experimented with adding a button below the search box, which I got that code from Purdue, but it is always visible under the search box, even when you're starting a search. And that really wasn't the look we wanted of having, okay, here's your box where you can enter your search terms. Oh, and here's a report a problem button because we know you'll have problems, right? So that's not the message we wanted to send. So the options we ended up selecting for the record page display, we are using the California State University System Report a Problem module. And for the search result pages, we ended up modifying an external search facet pane. And both of these buttons go to a form on the library website because that was the easiest to manage and maintain. So what it looks like, the in record button looked like this when we debuted it. You can see it's right below the full text availability on this record. If there's only print availability, it's right below that section for those records. So the CSU module actually is intended to have the web form built in on the page, which is super fancy and super cool. We tested that, but my search or my test submissions Only the first one ever came through to my email address. So I think there was some institutional spam blocking, which would be a problem. Obviously, people sending forms to nowhere is never great. And managing the form there would mean that we'd have to have two, that one built in, which would be harder to maintain, and then a separate one for our facet buttons. So we just linked it out to the library web form instead. So that's what that looked like. And then for the search results page in the facet, on the left-hand side, you can see what the code was intended to do, which is link out to other search options if you're not finding what you want. So I modified that to link out to our web form instead and turned it into a button. And honestly, getting the button appearance was the trickiest part here. And it collapses like the other facets. If you're on mobile, it goes into the little facet area along with the other facets. So that was very gratifying to get that all to work properly. So how it's going. So we turned these on in January of this year, right before the start of spring semester, and it's gone really well overall. However, initially we got some feedback from folks who were alarmed by the presence of the button because it's so visible, and like the in record button had the exclamation point icon. They thought that the button being there meant there was a problem, when we just wanted to offer the opportunity to report if you have a problem. So it was too noticeable, caused confusion. So we tweaked the color a little bit to be more subtle, and that has stopped the reports thinking that the button means there's a problem. So we're thinking this was a good solution. So things yet to be done. There's some odd hover behavior with the facet button in terms of the coloring. Not a big deal, it's functional, but I want to fix that because I'm a perfectionist sometimes. Also, the report a problem module code in the record display, I need to clean that up because there are still bits from the original like web form coding that are there that we're not using, need to just be removed. I also need to update the naming in the facet button code to reflect its actual purpose. Right now it thinks it's still an external search function. So folks who are looking at our code might get confused by that. And just a word of warning for those who do know JavaScript, if you look at our code, it's a mess. I'm sorry, I don't know JavaScript. I just torment it until it does what I want. But that said, if you want the code, feel free to take it, or I'm happy to share the specific files if you're curious. So some statistics for the built-in tool. We had that turned on from January 2023 through May 9th of this year. We had 71 total submissions. And as you can see from the graphs here, there was some folks who would click around between the categories before they submitted feedback, or they just didn't submit feedback, possibly because it was confusing, I don't know, or they were just trying to figure out what it was for. Contrast that with our report a problem, our new button statistics, which again, we turned on in January of this year. So less than 6 months, we've already gotten 121 submissions. And for those who manage e-resources, you will not be shocked that a little over half have to do with linking problems of various sorts. So we'll be looking at a breakdown of the reports we've been getting in the future. Here's a screenshot of the web form that's on our website. So the drop-down box under what's the problem, direct the message to different areas of the library. So the categories on this previous graph are the categories that users can select from. And so if they select other, they can type in whatever they want to describe the problem they're having. And then you can see on the web form that it grabs the URL of the search of the page that you originated from, and it also gives folks the option to supply their information for follow-up, or just say, no, thanks, I don't need follow-up. So
1 minute.
We give folks that option. So here's the feedback tool image customization directions. If anyone is interested in using the feedback tool and want to customize it, there they are. Otherwise, thank you for your attention. I will share the link to these slides in the chat in just a second. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Cindy. I love projects like that. I'm definitely going to check that out. All right. Up next, we have Trisha Clark. She's going to be presenting on embracing personal narratives in academic interviews.
All right, everyone. Good morning. Thank you again for being here. I'm just going to share my screen with you all. Second here. Okay, and hopefully you can all see that. All right, so I'll make this quick since it's lightning talk. Good morning again. My name is Trisha Clark. I am the Community College Engagement Librarian at UDC. And based on my topic, it's no surprise, I would like to tell you a quick story. I'm sure since we're all working in an academic context, we all have similar stories like this. So this story is actually just a personal anecdote about a research appointment experience that I had during my first month as an academic librarian at UDC. I'm still a relatively new academic librarian, so all of these experiences are really salient for me. They stick with me pretty deeply. So I had arranged to meet with a student via Zoom, and then realized when we were both signed in really quickly that she seemed really upset. So when I said hello and asked if she was okay, she said no. And then she proceeded to tell me about some housing issues she had going on. She lived in DC and had some housing issues somewhere off campus in DC. She told me she'd been dealing with these issues for a long time. And of course, I couldn't and didn't offer any advice in that session, but I listened to her and asked some follow-up questions to show her that I'd heard her and I was taking her concerns seriously. After about 15 minutes of conversation, she seemed a lot more relaxed and even came to a conclusion about how she could fix her problem on her own. She thanked me and then said it was nice to have someone who seemed to genuinely care. The rest of the appointment went smoothly, and when I followed up with her later that day with additional resources, she mentioned that she felt more confident about her research assignment, even though that's not what we spent the majority of our time talking about. I allowed her to tell me just a little bit part of her life story, and that made such a difference to both of us. So personal narratives, which is a form of storytelling, can provide a specific kind of meaning and insight into a person's worldview and sense of identity. This insight is essential to human connection. So before I talk more about personal narrative specifically, I do want to talk a little bit more about the concept of slow librarianship. And I apologize in advance. I have a few quotes I'm going to read off. I try not to have long quotes on slides, but I think it's important that you see the full context. So the slow movement, I'm going to air quote slow, the slow movement is thought to be influenced by the slow food movement. Hopefully you've heard of that, which is developed in opposition to this concept of fast food or getting things, having things quickly. The slow movement encourages us to rethink the fast-paced nature of modern life, including being mindful of how we eat, how we work, and how we live in general. Slow librarianship is such an interesting term for something I suspect all librarians are hoping to achieve. So librarian Meredith Farkas defines slow librarianship as, and I'm going to read the whole quote so you can get a sense for it. She defines it as an anti-racist, responsive, and values-driven practice that stands in opposition to neoliberal values. Workers in slow libraries are focused on relationship building, deeply understanding and meeting patron needs, and providing equitable services to their communities. Her definition goes on to say, internally, slow library culture is focused on learning and reflection, collaboration and solidarity, valuing all kinds of contributions and supporting staff as whole people. Slow librarianship is a process, not a destination. It is an orientation towards our work, ourselves, and others that creates positive change. It is an organizational philosophy that supports workers and builds stronger relationships with our communities. So as a form of conversation, reference interviews are uniquely positioned to facilitate certain principles of slow librarianship, specifically a focus on meaningful interactions, relationship building, and community care. In an academic setting where productivity, efficiency, and achievements are built into the community's expectations, reference interviews, and I'm also going to include here one-on-one research appointments, those things are especially great opportunities to enact practices that foster a sense of healthy well-being among students, faculty, and staff. I believe that one approach to treating the academic reference interview as a meaningful interaction is to provide space and opportunity for patrons to share parts of their personal narratives with us. And of course, parts, not the whole thing. Storytelling is an important aspect of human interaction. In folklore studies, storytelling is many things. It is cultural, it is traditional, it is entertainment and education. It is, of course, also a means of communication. Folklorist Robert A. George observes that, quote, stories can reflect cultural reality or distort it. They can reinforce the social structure and threaten social cohesion, or they can function as conditioning mechanisms and instruments of social control, or as an escape mechanism and instruments of social criticism. So essentially, our stories reflect our beliefs and our fears, but they also reflect our social structures and our cultural practices. Most importantly, storytelling can facilitate social connection. Because people intend for their stories to have an audience, there is also a performative aspect to storytelling, um, which both in the case of oral tales as well as literary tales. So the oral storyteller speaks with his or her audience in mind, paying close attention to their body language, their exclamations or lack thereof, and adjusting their performance as they go. Similarly, the literary storyteller writes with the intended audience in mind, which in many ways influences what and how they tell the story. So they're paying attention to their audience. This notion of performance also holds true for the telling of personal narratives, which of course is a form of storytelling. When people are telling personal narratives, they pay close attention to their audience. Research suggests that when people are talking about important events in their lives, any kind of reaction, even a hostile one, is preferable to no reaction at all. So telling parts of one's personal narrative can help to highlight one's sense of self and can tell us a lot about the person and how they feel about themselves. In essence, telling stories, particularly personal narratives or life stories, can have an immense meaning to the teller. So all of that said, why should we librarians care about personal narratives? Well, because making room for hearing excerpts from patrons' life stories as part of the reference interview and or research interview, one-on-one appointment, can help to foster a sense of belonging. Researcher Terrell Strayhorn does research on college student success, and he defines student sense of belonging as students perceive social support on campus, a feeling or sensation of being connected, the experience of mattering or feeling cared about, accepted, respected, valued by, and important to the group, for example, the campus community. His research centers on the idea that feeling a sense of belonging is a crucial factor in student academic success. And I would argue that faculty and staff also need that sense of belonging to feel satisfaction with their place of employment. It's the quality of the relationships that we make and our sense of being connected, accepted, and supported that tend to determine our success in places like school and work. So encouraging connection via the kind of conversation that happens during storytelling can help librarians better understand the information needs of our patrons and offer more effective assistance. In fact, doing this can help us understand what the patron already knows. It can help us get a better understanding of what the patron wants to know, and it can help us fill in the gaps for things that they may need but may not have asked for. So one useful example of this is encouraging students, and I'm referring to students here, but obviously this also applies to faculty and staff in different ways. A useful example is encouraging students to talk in more detail about how or why they chose a topic for a research paper, for instance. Specifically, it's helpful to find out what made them interested in that topic. So talking to them a bit more about that can help them, A, talk about themselves and you get to know them a bit better, but also help you facilitate their information needs. I have another short anecdote about a student I worked with who described some of her experiences as an immigrant. And to give you some context, I am also an immigrant. I'm from the Caribbean, which is where this student was from. And she picked up on that based on our accents. Some of my accent still comes out sometimes. So this student started by telling me about what it was like when she first moved to the US and feeling like she had a lot to learn. She mentioned some personal things like getting used to cultural differences, and eventually she started telling me about her challenges with things like finding internships and navigating the professional world as a young woman in a new country. Her research was centered around the value of leaving one's home to pursue education and job opportunities elsewhere. Hearing about a few aspects of her life story helped to give me context for her interests, but it also helped me understand a bit about what she already knew about the topic from her own experiences. She knew she wanted information about how leaving one's home for school and work could be beneficial, especially to women, but I encouraged her to think about whether she wanted to focus her research on a particular country like the US or to expand her research and include other countries. I also provided some additional suggestions for her about what kinds of resources would work best. So what does encouraging personal narratives as part of the reference interview look like in a practical sense? I know it's not always possible to listen to every single person's life story while you're working a reference desk or even if you're roving. I'm sure we have all encountered a patron who's talked to us for much longer than we were probably comfortable with. Reference interviews don't necessarily have a time limit, but we know that we have time limits. And of course, you have additional reasons to help folks if you have happen to have a line or additional people who may need help either in chat or a phone call. So there are a few things we can do within our time constraints, such as maintain the usual good tactics for customer service. And those things include making and maintaining eye contact whenever possible, demonstrating attentive and welcoming body language. So sitting upright, making sure you're facing the person that you're speaking to. This is, of course, referencing an in-person encounter. Demonstrating interest by actively listening and asking questions to clarify information when needed. And of course, you can also refer to parts of the story as necessary to help with the information search. And then the thing I think is probably most important is to offer to meet with the patron for a scheduled one-on-one research appointment to give them dedicated time. Sometimes people need more time to explain themselves or to even maybe give you context for something that they're looking for. And it's helpful for them to have specific time to do that. So ultimately, we don't need to spend hours listening to our patron stories for the interaction to be meaningful. Sometimes giving them an undivided 5 or even 10 minutes to share a bit about themselves is all it takes to make them feel comfortable, enough to talk about their information needs. These interactions sometimes become so meaningful that the patron decides to come back to you for help with another assignment. I could tell you so many other stories and snippets from my own personal narrative about the people I encounter regularly as an academic librarian. But ultimately, these interactions mean something to me too. The thing I can always come back to, even when I'm tired or I've spent the entire day talking to people and my social battery is just about low, is just to remember that a librarian's main role is to support people. And that even on an academic campus, and I would say even specifically especially on an academic campus, people want to feel heard and supported. So some people naturally want to tell their stories, and I think whenever possible, we should let them. And that is the end of my presentation. My works cited page, hopefully you can see that still, is up. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly.
Thanks, Tricia.
Of course.
Up next, we have expanding digitization capacity at Georgetown.
Okay. Let me just share my screen. All right. So thank you to the Washington Research Library Consortium for including us in the lightning talks. I'm Rachel Jacobson. I'm the Digital Repository and Preservation Librarian for Georgetown University. Today I'm talking with my colleagues, Ted Mallison, who manages the Digitization Lab for Digital Georgetown as the Digital Services Specialist, and Abigail Youngblood, who's the digital production specialist focusing on Jesuit collections. So over the past few years, we've built our capacity just in virtue of having our team back to fully staffed, which hasn't been the case since 2019. But in addition to staffing changes, we also were able to acquire some new equipment, which Ted and Abigail will go into more depth with. So many of you are already familiar with the benefits of digitization. For our digitization program, we focus on imaging material from our special collections department, which includes university archives, Jesuit collections, since we're a Jesuit university, art and also manuscripts and rare books. Over the past year, without the addition of the new equipment, we were able to add over 8,000 items to Digital Georgetown. Of course, all of that isn't just imaged material that we did in-house. Some of it is born digital from faculty, also our ETD program that adds a significant number of items to our digital repository each year. But with this new equipment, we're hoping to add even more items in the future. And with that, I'll hand it over to Ted, who will talk more about the new overhead scanner. And then Abigail will talk about our newly permanent copy stand setup.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. So our primary concern with increasing our digitization capacity in Lowinger Library was adding a second large format overhead scanner to accompany our 10-year-old now Zeuchel OS 14000. So our service contract expired with this machine, and because of its age, it's ineligible to renew the service contract. So while it's still functioning pretty well, we wanted to make sure we were set up with a second machine should we need a replacement. But in addition to replacement, we also wanted a machine that could do a little bit more than what our old Zeuchel could. In searching for a new scanner, we were looking for a larger imaging area to accommodate oversized materials and large, heavy, rare books, plus improved speed to increase throughput while still preserving the high image quality and practicality of our Zeuchel. Cost was also obviously a factor, and we wanted to work with a vendor that could give us the same level of service that we'd come to expect from our Zeuchel vendor, Crowley. However, buying a new Zeuchel wasn't necessarily a foregone conclusion. We really wanted to investigate all possible options. And I think that we were actually kind of rooting for something different, not because we wanted to change from Zeuchel or Crowley necessarily, but because we were looking to maybe investigate new technologies. So we were looking at a few different makers, Image Access, which we use their book eye scanners for patron scanning in our public areas, I2S, which manufacture the copybook scanners, and Digital Transitions, which produce the high-end copy stand systems. So next slide, thanks. One of the things we did was consult with some of our peer institutions here in the WRLC and beyond, visiting them if we could, or talking to them over calls or email to see what they were using in their own digital services areas. So here in DC, we visited Howard University and George Washington University, and a big thank you to Nick Oakley at Howard and Dalton Alvis at GW for their help with this. We also consulted with colleagues at North Carolina State, Johns Hopkins, and Case Western Reserve. Finally, we took a field trip to Crowley's showroom up in Frederick, Maryland, to see the latest Zeuchel models and discuss options for continuing a relationship with them. So we really did try to get as full a picture as possible of the options available to us. And I think we got pretty honest appraisals from about each of the machines we saw, and the sort of relationships with vendors that some of our peer institutions had. Okay, next slide. Thanks. In the end, we did find that Zeuchel offered us the best and most cost-effective solution for getting improved imaging area and speed at a practical size. So the machine we purchased, seen here, is the Zeuchel OSC1. This model was introduced in 2022 and features a 3.8 second scan cycle when scanning at 300 pixels per inch. And is A1 size to accommodate some of our largest and heaviest rare books. It sits on top of a motorized work table that can be raised or lowered for greater accessibility, and comes with an adjustable book cradle for digitizing bound materials that cannot lay flat. It's packaged with the OmniScan 12 imaging software, which we've already been using for years with the old Zeuchel, and we got additional training from Crowley to better understand how to employ some of the software's lesser known features to improve our imaging workflows. Adding the second Zeuchel that functions much as the old one does and uses the same software with which we were already familiar was definitely the right choice for us. So next slide. So just one example of something we've been able to digitize with the new scanner. a 16th century map of Jerusalem, which is from our art collections. It's pretty large, about 24 by 36 inches, something that wouldn't have fit comfortably on our old scanner. We would have had to scan it in pieces and then stitch it together. But it fits quite comfortably on the new A1 size scanner. And as you can see from the next slide, we can capture quite a bit of detail with just a single scan. So now I'll turn it over to Abigail to talk about the other new addition to our digitization program.
Yes, so for our setup, we purchased the Hasselblad 907X, which is a mirrorless medium format camera. We opted to go with the Hasselblad camera as it provided us with a less expensive copy stand setup compared to other comparable equipment. And as someone who used digital transitions equipment in my previous position, I can say that the Hasselblad with our setup is more easy to use and fits into our digitization workflow seamlessly. It's easily adaptable for our needs, from digitizing maps to capturing the details of minuscule print in a small book. We have two lenses, an 80 and a 50 millimeter, which offer us interchangeability for the sharpness and detail that we want to achieve in our shots. And the camera and lenses also offer us a range of ways to shoot different sizes of material. And the copy stand has been a very utilized new tool for us, as it's primarily been useful for digitizing smaller foldered archival material, as it allows us to quickly digitize this flat material at higher resolutions. We also prepared the room that the copy stand was in, which meant darkening the room with black drape cloths covering any windows or reflective materials, setting up a computer workstation, and utilizing LED lights for continuous illumination on the objects. We're using the software that is recommended with Hasselblad cameras, which is called Focus, to digitize the material. And this software is pretty comparable to other image capture software such as Capture One or Lightroom. And the camera is directly tethered to the computer, which allows ease of use for digitization, processing, and exporting our photos from just one software platform. And as seen in this example, this is a sacramental register, and it measures about 3 by 3.5 inches, a single page, and it has minuscule print. And this is a perfect example that we shot on our copy stand, as its small fragile size was too difficult to digitize on one of our Zeuschels, but was easily able to be shot on the copy stand, where we could carefully flatten the book, and we were able to capture the fine details of the written script in our images. But our team is excited to continue using and learning from all of our new digitization equipment. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. We are just got an email that our next person up is having some computer issues and should be logging back in just a second. Hi, Abby. Glad your computer's working. I see you're back in. You can go ahead and start whenever you want.
Yes, all right, thank you. Apologies for that delay. Let me share my screen. And if you want to look at the slides on your own screen as we go, I'll send a link to that in the chat. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. I'm going to be talking about planning, teaching, and evaluating data services workshops. So a little bit about me, just so everyone knows, my name is Abby Sheets. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Data Services Librarian at Georgetown University. I have been at Georgetown for about 1.5 years now, so this presentation is going to cover sort of my work here in the previous academic year. So I'm going to be going through what is in a data services workshop with the structure and learning goals I cover in these workshops, and then pivot to tracking and analyzing my workshop data and looking at findings for improving future workshops. So as a quick overview of what I offer in workshops, each workshop covers a specific subject, whether that is a software tool and or a method of analysis. Their duration is 1 to 2 hours, depending on the workshop. And then I try to level them as for total beginners, intermediate, or advanced, so students, staff, and faculty can self-select the workshop that is most appropriate for them. And then finally, in this previous academic year, all of these workshops were offered over Zoom, and they were recorded and distributed to all registrants for asynchronous learning. So you can see the sampling of offerings, as well as some sort of quick stats on the scale of how many workshops. Some of these were offered multiple times, which is why there's not 26 listed, but 26 workshops over the academic year with 763 registrations and 172 people attending live, which I'll get into a little bit later about those numbers. So what the structure of these workshops covers. Before each workshop, I do send the day before a reminder email with information about the workshop slides, data, and other materials. Similar to how I sent that box link in the chat, I would create a box folder and send that to registrants. And most importantly, instructions on how to access or download software for the workshop, so we do not have to spend a ton of time in workshop doing software, housekeeping, downloading, etc. Then we would go into, in the workshop, an intro with about your instructor, an overview of the Digital Scholarship Services unit as a whole at Georgetown, since I like to sort of plug all of our tools that we use in our division, as well as learning goals and the workshop agenda, and then a review of that software access, just in case some people need a little bit more support on that. Then we'll start with overview and definitions. I think this is really helpful to cover these two questions. What is the software method capable of, and what is it appropriate for, to sort of cover the bookends of analysis? So where do the participants, what sort of data do they need at the start of their analysis, and what can they expect to see at the very end of their analysis, to make sure those two things match up with what their goals for analysis are. And next, making sure that we have that vocabulary lesson in the overview and definitions of knowing those keywords, since those key terms can help those who want to learn further have the knowledge to search out new information on their own. Then next we would move into a demo. This takes up the biggest chunk of the workshop, would be this live demonstration where I share my screen and participants can follow along using the data from the box folder with me through the workshop. So this also is accompanied by a written step-by-step guide or sample code that I share in that box folder as well. So if someone follows behind, they can catch back up with a step-by-step guide or sample code, or if someone prefers to just have a written guide, if they're more of someone who learns better from written guidance versus audio instruction. Then for beginner workshops only, I do an optional homework assignment at the end of the workshop so I'll explain that in the workshop and provide an answer key to sort of answer the most common question I get at the end of the workshop, which is, what can I do with this next? So giving them that chance to practice those skills on their own and build a little bit further. And then finally, we'll end on further reading, which will have information about library resources. I always plug our institutional subscription to LinkedIn Learning, as well as books in the library. Some non-library learning resources are also great options for learning as well. And then the final library resource I like to reiterate they can use is me. So I'll give them a reminder of my instructor email and then my availability for one-on-one consultation. So the general learning goals for these workshops listed here. One would be accessing that software and the resources to learn it. Second would be understanding the capabilities. So if they were to put time into learning where can they expect to get with this particular software and method. Finally, an understanding of the software interface, documentation, and any troubleshooting resources. And then at the end of the workshop with that demonstration, I like to have participants have completed one product, whatever that may be, whether it's a graph, a data table, a t-test result. Having something that they can say they accomplished this particular task is a great learning goal for them to accomplish. And then finally, throughout workshops, I like to be able to incorporate that data is information. And like any other information, as librarians, we know in the information literacy framework, information must be evaluated, cited, and presented responsibly. So I like to incorporate that throughout the workshops. In some, it comes up a little bit more than in others, but making sure that participants understand that the responsibility for using data, like any other information, holds in these workshops as well. So pivoting to the research questions and sort of the data collection and research, what I wanted to look at with the evaluation was who is attending the workshops and which workshops, does that change over time, and what improvements can be made. So a quick overview of the workshop data. On the left, this is sort of data that I had already been capturing kind of passively, I realized, through Zoom, since Zoom does collect a lot of data and you can add these questions into the registration. And I was also collecting lab attendance through our LibInst app, so I had all of that already. And then I added on an optional feedback survey, which you can see I got 23 responses over the year. So not the highest response rate, but did give me some good qualitative feedback and information from participants as well. So what I found from this is that we had a lot of people registering for workshops, the plurality of whom were graduate students. We had 41% of workshop registrants were graduate students, followed by staff and AAP, which is academic and administrative professionals, and then undergraduate students. So this sort of hinted me in that maybe our undergraduate student engagement is a little bit lower than I had hoped, so trying to find new ways to target undergrads to attend these workshops. Another insight from this data is that many of our workshop registrants, 35%, which is all of these little bars here, are repeat customers, meaning they registered for more than one workshop. I think our highest number was one person registered for 13. So we think this is great that it shows that there is an audience who welcomes and appreciates workshops and likes to come back for more. And so we want to work on now expanding our workshops to meet their needs, as well as bringing in more people to these workshops as well. Looking at the workshops I ran by software, we can see that Excel and Python were the most popular, or excuse me, Excel and R were the most popular. This makes sense since we had I believe four Excel workshops per semester and 3 in R per semester, but Python was only 1 in each semester. So this Python interest is still high and I think can be met with more workshops to meet that need, which we've sort of already met with Excel and R by offering those additional workshops. And then finally, looking at these over time, this is just for the spring semester. I looked at this lab attendance, which is this dark blue, Zoom attendance in light blue, and then no attendance. We can see that after spring break, our live attendance has definitely gone down. The Zoom attendance did stay sort of significant, did say hi, but looking at this, making sure to schedule these workshops, I think now I know for the future that moving these workshops to before spring break and compressing them to get more engagement would be a better way to attract attendance for these workshops. So all together, the next steps for improving the future workshops would be definitely to enhance marketing and targeting to attract undergraduate students. I'm also hoping to introduce in-person and hybrid workshops next academic year, since all of these were over Zoom, starting with our most popular beginner level workshops, those R and Python workshops, and adding a new beginner level Excel workshop in person. Additionally, expanding the Python workshops, the biggest barrier to that has been my own Python knowledge. So learning more about Python to be able to teach more Python. And then finally integrating AI into data workshops and making sure that students will understand how to use AI responsibly to enhance their coding in these coding-based data tools. So thank you all for listening. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Abby. That was great. All right, everyone, that concludes our first round of lightning talks today. We will take a break for lunch. Hopefully you can get outside. It's beautiful out there. And we will resume back here at 1 o'clock. See you then.